It is day 364 of the Gaza genocide. The Israeli colonizer has killed over 41,788 Palestinians, according to the Health Ministry. They've also expanded their war on civilians to Lebanon, where they rained down hellfire as they've rained down on Gaza, killing over 1,000 people in less than 2 weeks. It seems like there is no end in sight, and it seems like the Israeli colonizer, along with its Western backers, wants to escalate the war further and push the entire region to all-out war. To discuss the Zionist entity's crimes, as well as what the future may hold for the region, I'm joined today by Professor Sami Al Arian, Director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University. Professor Sami, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Over the last few weeks, Israel has killed over 1,000 people in Lebanon. They've assassinated the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, and they started a ground invasion into Lebanon, which so far does not seem to be going too well. What exactly is Israel aiming to achieve?
Well, to understand what the goals of the Israeli regime is, we really have to go back and understand the context that this war is being prosecuted with. Israel has been at war with the Palestinian people and generally with the people in the area for over 76 years. Over time, its aim is to be the hegemon in the region, to control all of Palestine, all of British mandated Palestine. And they started gradually doing this. It's the product of the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement is a movement that's been in the world today for over a century and a quarter. Its aim is to take possession of the Holy Land of Palestine, to displace its people, to dispossess its people, to expel them, and replace them with Jewish communities from around the world. That's the aim of the Zionist movement. It is a settler colonial project, settler colonial enterprise. It has several features. It's a racist movement. It thinks that Jews are chosen people, so it has a supremacist context, a supremacist ideology, and with the extension, a racist ideology. It's an expansionist movement. It started having settlements in the early century of the last century, and they started encroaching on others. They took advantage of the British mandate, which allied itself, starting with the Balfour Declaration, with the Zionist goal of taking over Palestine. So by 1948, even though they only had 6.5% of the land that they got through all kinds of manipulations and tactics, not that the Palestinians sold their land, as the myth says. Even though that was the case, they took over by 1949, 78% of the land, and by 1967, 100% of the Palestinian land and beyond. They had the Golan Heights, and at one point they had Sinai, and so on and so forth. So Israel always had this goal of taking over, even bit by bit, inch by inch, the land of Palestine, and the aim is to settle it. And therefore, when this first Intifada took place in 1987, and they had difficulty dealing with it, they started what is called the Oslo process. The Oslo process came when the official Palestinian leadership, in the face of Yasser Arafat and the PLO, they gave a historical recognition, concession, that they said, okay, we're going to recognize Israel on 78% of Palestine, provided that we get a state on 22%. The Israelis and the Zionists had no intention whatsoever to give the Palestinians any kind of a state. At best, it would have been an autonomy, but even that was not achieved. So in over 3 decades, the number of settlers in the West Bank increased from about 115,000. Today, they're about 800,000. When the current fascist government took over at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, Smotrich said it best. He articulated what the real aim of Israel is, what the real aim of the Israeli and the Zionist regime is going to be for this current government. He said the Palestinians had three choices. One, they would have to recognize and to declare Israel as being the state of the Jewish people, that they will have no inherent right to settle it, no inherent civil or political rights to live in this land. They would be basically guests on their own land at the whim of the Israeli government. If they don't accept that, they could be compensated and leave. And failing that, they would be killed. There is no fourth option. And he was very open, very clear, and on this. And they started actually an aggressive settlement policy. And he said he wanted during this current government, which would end by 2020, I believe 2027, to settle 1 million people in the West Bank. That was the aim. It didn't stop there. During that year, they started an aggressive policy to annex Area C in the West Bank. As you know, through Oslo, the West Bank was separated into areas A, B, and C, in which Area C has the least number of Palestinians compared to Area B and A. It's about 60% of the West Bank, and they started very aggressive policy to intimidate, harass, and dispossess the Palestinians. Ben Gvir, who is the partner of Netanyahu and Smotrich, became in charge of security. He started arming settlers to the tune of about 150,000 different weapons to continue that policy of harassment and intimidation. And they started encroaching on these villagers and these Palestinian farmers and residents in this area and beyond. They even started raiding camps and towns and cities and trying to kill, assassinate Palestinians in their own homes, in their own towns, in their own cities. In addition to that, they started encroaching on Al-Aqsa, threatening that they will actually take it over and build what they call as a third temple. They were trying to impose a policy in which they will have the right to go there and to take over during certain times the area, hoping that they will at one point erase the Dome of the Rock and replace it with their third temple. And they want to start going there more frequently, as we saw during 2023. In addition to that, they, as Ben Gvir became in charge of security and prisons, they started a very aggressive policy against Palestinian prisoners. The rights that they gained throughout a struggle of decades was taken away bit by bit. They were denied education that they had. They were denied visitations, other kind of things that they were enjoying with the limited things that they were getting in prison. It was taken away from them because he said that they would have to suffer as prisoners in Israeli prisons. And when you look at Gaza, which had been at the time and still is under siege, crippling siege for 16 years, going into 17 and non-ending, the Palestinians really had no horizon, no hope of any changes in these conditions. All these were designed so that they can force the Palestinians to leave, force the Palestinians to have no hope, hoping that somehow they would leave their land. Now add to this also the strategic situation, which was embodied when Netanyahu appeared before the General Assembly of the United Nations 2 weeks before Tufan al-Aqsa, before October 7th. He appeared there with a map in his hand, drawing a line that started from India, going through the ocean, then the Gulf, then to the United Arab Emirates, and from there to Saudi Arabia, then to Jordan, and then to Haifa, and from Haifa through the Mediterranean to Europe. And he called that the India-Middle East economic, the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor. And he was boasting that this is going to be the crowning of Israel as being the most important country in the region, the hegemon of the region, where it will be indispensable, that it will take care of the region and it will lead its prosperity, it will lead it in a way that everybody will succumb to its wishes. In that map, he mandated Palestine as Israel. There was nothing about Palestine in this map. He had no intention whatsoever to give or to concede anything to the Palestinians. He was hoping through the Americans to have a normalization pact agreement with Saudi Arabia, which would have been the jewel of the crown, in which after that he would get Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and that would end any kind of struggle for the Palestinians. That would be the end of the road. That would be the end of the struggle. Israel had a problem all along, and it's trying to take advantage of October 7th. That problem is that they were faced with either a two-state solution if they are willing to concede part of the Palestinian territory as mandated in Oslo, which they completely refused to do, or they would have to afford the Palestinians equal rights like other Jews and citizens in the state of Israel, one man, one vote. That would end the Zionist dream of having a supremacy for Jews in the land of Palestine. Both were rejected out of hand. And the third would have been apartheid, which they were practicing. But the problem is the world would not stand over time with such practice, as it did not stand for it when it was in South Africa. So they found that with Tufan al-Aqsa, that there is a fourth option, which is to commit genocide and ethnic cleansing, to finish, in their words, the job that was not finished, the task that was not finished back in 1948 or 1967, because the number of Palestinians in mandated Palestine, in the whole of Palestine from the river to the sea, actually now exceeds the number of Jews. And that is problematic. There is a demographic bomb that is ticking every day. And that's what Netanyahu and his fascist partners have been trying to impose since October 7th, which is to make Gaza unlivable, end all civic life, destroy everything in it, hospitals, clinic, residences, mosques, churches, markets, schools, universities, all facets of public life, generations, electricity generators, water salination plants, so that the Palestinians will give up, they will be despair, they will feel despair, and they would leave. That is the whole idea of what's taking place. It is not a war against Hamas or the resistance. It's a war that has been waging for decades against the Palestinian presence and existence in the Holy Land. Meanwhile, the whole world was just looking and sitting idly by, doing absolutely nothing to stop this carnage, to stop this mayhem, to stop the killing and the destruction that Israel has been brutally conducting in Gaza now for 1 year. Now, while he was doing that, his appetite became even bigger, because he in his thinking, in his twisted mind, he thinks that this is a historic opportunity, since the world is tolerating what he's doing to Gaza. He's done every single war crime in the book. He's done it, and he got away with it. That's what he thinks. Then why not also end the threat from the north, coming from Hezbollah? And while he's at it, if he is able to do that, will end the so-called axis of resistance. That's what he's been trying to do for the past few weeks. He had some tricks up his sleeve. He used these tactical intelligence advantages, using the pages and the walkie-talkies and all these things, thinking that somehow this magically will make Hezbollah disappear. And of course, that is not the case. Even with his policy of assassinations, killing some of the most senior leaders of the resistance in Lebanon, which he thought in his mind that this would end the threat of Hezbollah, and therefore he could probably move in with the help of the Americans to destroy either the nuclear threat coming from Iran, or at least clip its wings. But of course, as usual, they don't learn the lessons. That was not the case. It's going to be very difficult, if not totally impossible, for Netanyahu to end the resistance or defeat the resistance in Lebanon, as he hasn't been able to defeat the resistance in Gaza after 1 year, considering what Gaza is right now, is under siege, where they have absolutely no help, that he also used the weapon of starvation As we all know, there are a lot of people in Gaza today who are starved. They're trying to kill them, if not by bombs, but by starvation, that they have been under these horrible conditions, and yet he hasn't been able to defeat them. He hasn't been able to bring them to surrender. Do you think he would be able to do that in Lebanon? Absolutely, he couldn't. And we saw also the response by the Iranians, in which it humbled him, because all these dreams that he had became nightmares, and he's unable actually to figure out a response that will spare whatever is left of his dreams. So just to summarize and sum up, what happened is that Israel had certain goals that it wanted to fulfill, to achieve. They wanted to end the resistance in Gaza. They want to eliminate the resistance in Gaza. They wanted to free their captives without paying a price for it. They did not want to exchange the prisoners. There are over 10,000 prisoners in Israeli prison under horrible conditions. Some of them even died under torture. Torture is being practiced every single day. Before October 7th, there were about 5,700 prisoners, 2,000 of which were never even charged with a crime. Many of them were children and women. So that just continued. So he didn't want to free any of them to get back his captives. He wanted to free them through military pressure. That has not succeeded and will never succeed. He also wanted to eliminate the resistance coming from Lebanon and from other members of the Axis of Resistance, whether it's from Yemen or Iraq, or even the biggest one of all, which is Iran. That also is going to be a tall order. It's very difficult for him to achieve that. So if we look at Israeli objectives, you will find them very big, very grand, but at the same time, you would see that the arrogance of Netanyahu and the Israeli regime, the haughtiness, the hubris they're trying to have, will not be achieved. It will be very difficult for them to achieve any of these goals.
Thank you very much for that. Given that the Israeli occupation has not been able to achieve anything strategically in Gaza, and given the fact that Hezbollah is much better armed, they have many more fighters, they are in ways also battle-hardened, why does Netanyahu think that he will be able to achieve anything in Lebanon?
It's arrogance, as I said, but he also a realist. He knows now that he's not going to be able to do that, just because he had some successes, tactical successes in the past few weeks. Whether it was the bombings that he was able to inflict on Hezbollah and the assassination policies that he was able to get, and he thought with these he would be able to cripple Hezbollah. But I think he's awakened now to a different reality. There is a war of attrition right now, not only in Gaza but also across South Lebanon. It will be very difficult for him to extricate himself from this situation without being humiliated and defeated. And therefore, he will continue trying to press this, particularly since the people who are his allies in this government, they really don't care except about their ideological goals, which is unattainable, unsustainable. They will not be able to achieve it. They live in fantasy world, and the Americans so far have been too weak to actually make a difference. If not, they are totally complicit and partners in these crimes. And they have been giving him all the different resources needed for him to fulfill, to achieve his goals, and he's failed to do so. Very soon, they would have to make a decision. Either we're going to face a wider regional war in which there will be even further destruction of Israeli assets. And of course, granted that the Arabs and the Muslims in Lebanon and Palestine and other places, including Iran, they may suffer destruction, but that would be inevitable. But Israel cannot afford to have its infrastructure totally destroyed. The Arabs and Muslims on this side, they are used to Israeli destructive behavior. Israelis are not. So pretty soon they would have to make a decision. Either there will be mutually assured destruction, in which they would be the losers, not not us, not the Palestinians, not the Arabs, not the Iranians, not the region, or they would have to remove Netanyahu from the scene because he is leading this partially to also save himself from being held accountable to what happened on October 7th and to other crimes he had committed before October 7th, or there will be some kind of a stalemate in which they will bring him to reality and try to stop it. Either way, I don't think the resistance will surrender. I don't think the resistance will be defeated. I think it will be the other way around.
On the 1st of October, which is Tuesday, Iran fired almost 200 ballistic missiles at Israel in what it called a retaliatory strike. Iran has also warned of a quote unquote unconventional response if Israel hits back. Why did Iran join the battle at this stage in particular? Why didn't they join earlier, for example?
Well, Iran tried to avoid any direct involvement in this war. They have used what is called strategic patience, while the other side was using strategic madness. Iran was aggressed upon first through some assassinations of some of its commanders. Then they hit its consulate, which supposedly protected under international law in Syria. So it had to respond. It was a very limited response. It was a message to the United States and to Israel that Iran is capable of reaching deeply into the Zionist state, and it can really hurt it badly. They only wanted to send a message. The message was not that they wanted to inflict harm or serious harm on it, but it's capable of doing so. That message was not received by Israel. So they again attacked on Iranian soil the leader of Hamas, which is obviously in contravention of all international law and behavior. When you have someone on your soil and he gets assassinated openly by someone, that's a hostile act, in which case it has to be responded. Iran could not afford not to respond. So for 2 months, the United States was pleading with Iran not to respond, not to retaliate, not to take revenge, in return that the United States will restrain Israel and will stop the war. It will stop its genocidal war in Gaza. Iran thought that this is a good bargain. If it can stop the carnage, the destruction, the killing, the massacres taking place in Gaza for not actually retaliating and avoiding a regional war, then it was okay with it. It wanted to give it a chance. Of course, the United States, as usual, was a dishonest broker. It never really wanted, or it is either unwilling or unable to convince the Israelis to stop their genocidal war in Gaza. In fact, Israel thought of this as being a sign of weakness. So it started targeting Hezbollah and put new objectives, which is to return the displaced people, the people who had to leave because of the attacks, the mutual attacks in the north of Israel, in the southern of Lebanon. Tens of thousands of people had to leave. And now Netanyahu and his war criminal cabinet wanted to put new conditions, which is to return back these people. And to do that, they wanted to attack Hezbollah, degrade Hezbollah, eliminate the threat of Hezbollah in the north. And they started this carnage. They started these assassinations and these theatrical intelligence acts by which they could actually use what is called shock and awe, that somehow Hezbollah would be deterred because of these conditions. But the fact of the matter is they succeeded in hitting many commanders. They succeeded in eliminating many of their senior officers and senior leaders. They even killed the most important person of all in Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah himself. But with that, did that stop the attacks? Did that degrade actually militarily the assets of Hezbollah? Can they actually return any of their settlers back to the north? Can they claim that they are now able to fulfill and achieve their goals? No, none of that is true. So it is this behavior, again, of arrogance, of haughtiness, of hubris that Israel exhibits every single time. They never learned the lesson. It was the same tactics they used back in 1982 and 2006. And in both cases, they thought that they have achieved their goal, that they have been able to break their enemies, only to see that the resilience and resistance of their enemies stronger than the will of the Zionists. And then they repel them back, they will defeat them back, they will push them back. That's what happened in 1882. They had to withdraw back in 2000. That's what happened in 2006. First few days, first few weeks, they thought, okay, we had them now on the ropes. We can kill them, finish them off. What happened? They were at the end calling for ceasefire, pleading with Americans to get them out of this mess that they created for themselves. Same thing happened today. They did it in Gaza, now they're doing it in South Lebanon, and now even if they hit Iran, the same thing will happen.
What is the source of this arrogance, as you say, which prevents the Israelis from learning from their mistakes?
There are many sources of arrogance. Ideologically speaking, these people think of themselves as being God's chosen people, that they are the true ones. They are supremacists. They have supremacy over other people. That is in their books, that's in their philosophy, it's in their beliefs. That's how they look at other people. They call them the Goyim, the others. The others are not the same as us. It's a racist, sick mentality that does not look at others as human beings. We saw during the beginning of October 7th, when they had a counterattack, how they were using even some verses from the Torah that says, kill them all, kill their children, kill their animals, kill their crops, and so on and so forth. That's the mentality that they have. It's total arrogance. That's one source. Another source, of course, they have this sense which was built over decades, this sense of invincibility, that they can actually defeat all their enemies combined, that they can never be defeated, even though they've never won actually past 1967 a total clean war. It's always being half-half, almost ending in most of the time either defeats or stalemates. They also think that because the United States is at their fingertips, that they wrap it by their fingers, that with the power of the United States, they cannot be threatened. They also think because they have the nuclear weapons, the ultimate weapon, that at the end, no one will dare to attack them or to put them in jeopardy. They can always come back and use that weapon. And we've seen during this past year that they are not deterred. They can use whatever is at their disposal. They're willing to kill everything: children, infants, women, crops, animals. There's no restraint on them. They can do whatever they want. So it is this is the type, this is the nature of this enemy, of this army, of this state, of this regime. So when you put all that together, you end up with a Frankenstein, trying to not only kill everyone in his path, but will ultimately kill himself.
Given that the United States stands firmly behind Israel, is Iran ready for war with Israel and potentially the United States, or do you think they may have miscalculated with the barrage of missiles that they shot?
I don't think they have miscalculated at all. I think they have been extremely patient. They understand that this is not a picnic. It's not a cakewalk. If there is going to be a war, it's going to be devastating. But it's going to be devastating for everybody, not just for Iran. Let's also remember that the Taliban, a ragtag army, the United States, despite 20-year waging war on Taliban, they could not defeat the Taliban. The will of the people will always carry the day. They could not defeat the Viet Cong. They could not defeat the people of Vietnam. They also spent over 10 years trying to fight them. They killed over 3 million people. Some even say 5 million. They could not defeat them. They had to withdraw. They were the ones who were repelled. They're the ones who were defeated. Same thing in Iraq. So the United States can bluster all it wants. Yes, it can wreak havoc. Yes, it can destroy. But that's not going to go done without real pain on their own. The United States has about 63 military bases in the region. It has a lot of assets, a lot of naval ships and aircraft carriers, and so on and so forth. Yes, it can do a lot of damage, but it also would receive a lot of damage. Is the United States ready today to wreck the world economy? Because if Israel hits the refineries and the oil production facilities of Iran, Iran will do the same. Then the whole world, instead of paying 80 or 70 or $90 per barrel, it will become $500 and $600 per barrel, which will tank the world economy. Is the US ready for that? The US prides itself as being the architect of the international order. It is the one that is managing it and keeping it stable. And now, if it wants to turn it into a third world war, of course it can. But that's not going to go one way. Yes, they can do a lot of damage to Iran, but Iran, as it demonstrated not once, but twice now, is also capable of raining Israel with missiles and destroying its infrastructure and facilities and oil refineries and oil tanks and military bases and industrial areas. I mean, it's the same thing. So if this is a Samson option in which Israel wants to destroy Iran at the expense of destroying itself, then it just invited Iran to do that. I don't think they are that mad, even though they might be, in the name or in the person of Netanyahu and his war criminal cabinet. But I think the United States is much smarter than that. I don't believe the United States is willing to wreck and destroy the world economy so that Netanyahu would not go to prison.
With all the news of escalations with Lebanon and Iran, Gaza in some ways has faded into the background. What do you believe the recent escalations mean for the people of Gaza?
Well, I mean, obviously, the whole thing that is taking place today in Lebanon is because of Gaza. Israel threatened Hezbollah, says, you need to separate this war, this front, the Lebanese front, from the Gaza front. This is our war. We're going to prosecute it the way we want. We're going to kill every Gazan if we can. We're going to isolate them. We're going to do whatever we want with Gaza. No one is going to be allowed to stop us. The only people who said that is not going to happen, we are in solidarity with Gaza. We will fight alongside Gaza. We will keep you from trying to destroy Gaza, where Hezbollah in Lebanon and Ansarullah in Yemen. And Israel didn't like it. The fact that the rest of the world, the rest of the Muslim world, the rest of the Arab world didn't give a hoot about what's happening in Gaza except empty rhetoric should be counted against them. Then Netanyahu and his war criminal cabinet came and said to Hezbollah, if you do not separate these two fronts and allow our settlers to go north, we're going to attack you, we're going to destroy you, we're going to invade. Hassan Nasrallah, the late leader, said, be my guest. I'm not going to back down. It's a challenge, and I accept this challenge. So they went after him, they killed him, but the movement itself has not backed down. I mean, the deputy leader came a few days ago and said that we are now going to surrender, we're not going to back down. Whatever Hassan Nasrallah says is still valid. We will not stop this engagement with you until you stop the war on Gaza. So the implication here is that with the involvement now of Hezbollah and the gradual and increasing involvement of Iran and Ansarullah and others, this is actually a relief to Gaza. This will give a hope to the Palestinians that they're not alone. They haven't been abandoned like all other Muslim countries and the whole world, this hypocritical world that does not really care much about the Palestinians, that it let it go through a process of genocide day in and day out, tens of thousands of people being killed, maimed, displaced, under the rubble, without organs, without hands, without feet. And it's looking at all this as if nothing is happening and leaving them actually under starvation and denied every source of life. The only people who are standing up are these people. So if there is any hope for the Palestinians, it is for the Lebanese and the Yemenis and the Iranians to continue their campaign until this onslaught, until this genocide is over. It stops. Netanyahu and the Israeli war criminal cabinet has not listened to anyone. You have United Nations resolutions ignored, Security Council resolutions ignored, International Court of Justice decisions ignored, and pleas after plea from every leader in the world ignored. So what else would the Palestinians wait for? To be just handed over so that they can kill them one by one? When these people stood up and they said, we're not going to allow our Palestinian brothers and sisters without a fight, they should be thanked for. People should appreciate what they are doing. And therefore, the implication to the Palestinians would be that we wanted more people to stand up to these bullies, to these criminals, to these maniacs, in order to stop the genocide taking place against the Palestinians in Gaza.
Do you believe that we are definitely headed for an all-out war in the region, or is there still some sort of off-ramp, some way we can reach a ceasefire before we get to that point?
Well, if it is left to the hardcore Zionists, we might end up with a regional war. That's what they're looking for. Christian Zionists have always been praying for Armageddon. They think somehow with this war, Jesus is going to come down and is going to start, all their, I don't know how to put it, characterize it without offending anybody. But they thought that the apocalypse was going to take place and then everyone is going to go to heaven, and that the Jews, they hate Jews, by the way. They are very anti-Semitic, but they love Israel because they think Israel is their ticket to heaven. I mean, all these delusions that these people have been living under, obviously, they are praying for such a war, for such a conclusion. But I think most people, particularly those who are in Western capitals, are realists. They understand, they love life. They don't believe in any of that. They think these are crazy ideas, even though they use them for their own ends. They will realize pretty soon that the path that they have been following, that the trajectory of this is going to make everybody lose. This is not a one-way loss for the Iranians or the Arabs or the Turks or the Muslims. This is everybody's loss. So this is one way, thinking that these people are rational. But if irrational thinking takes over, then we could be headed for a war. But as I said, this war will be devastating, and I think everybody would lose. So if you have to think logically and rationally, that would lead you to some sort of a settlement by which there will be an end of a war, there will be an exchange of captives, and then people would have to go back, rethink, and rebuild and restart. But if it is left to Netanyahu and his fascist friends and fascist partners, we may end up with a limited war in which people will see what it means to have a world that is partially destroyed, economy that is partially destroyed, where everyone would be suffering. And if people want to choose to have a regional war where there are no ceilings and no red lines and everybody is fighting to the hilt, then obviously we are talking about Armageddon, which I very much doubt that this is going to be the trajectory of where we're heading.
On a final note, Professor, it's been almost a year since the Al-Aqsa flood operation. There are over 41,000 people dead in Gaza, killed by the Zionist war machine. The Israelis have expanded their efforts to Lebanon, killing over 1,000, potentially war with Iran, and there is no real end in sight. I wanted to ask you, 1 year on, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, what we need to do is to look at this with the strategic lens. This is just one episode of a long struggle. And we have to look at this struggle and to understand or to determine what would be the end goal, what would be the grand strategy. The Israeli enterprise, the Zionist project that has been now in Palestine for almost a century, with 76 years of an actual state, Zionist state has not relented. It is continuing trying to achieve its final goal of displacing all the Palestinians, of expelling, dispossessing all the Palestinians, and building a state on Palestine, on the ruins of Palestinians, where this state would be the hegemon, would be the state that would control the whole region. That is the whole idea. This is what Jabotinsky, one of the strands of Zionism, which is now ruling, which is actually the one that is the majority today in the Zionist state. This is what they're calling for. And when you look at the type of structures they're trying to build, how they're trying to exclude Palestinians, how they're trying to build this extremist state, you would say that the only reasonable goal for us is to dismantle these racist, supremacist structures. There is no other way that you can build a just society, a free society, a democratic society, while these structures are in control. And if we do that, then we have to see, how do we do this? We cannot do this without identifying the type of imperatives, type of reasons, characteristics, features that would allow the Zionist structures to endure, to continue, to be sustained, to expand. And to do that, then we will conclude that our struggle is a long struggle, and that struggle is simply to dismantle the Zionist structures by engaging all Zionists and try to weaken their influence, not only in Palestine, but throughout the world. This is a very high, tall objective that Palestinians on their own cannot achieve. The formula is very simple. We cannot dismantle these Zionist structures without the Palestinians, and we cannot dismantle them with the Palestinians alone. So looking at what happened in the past year, we can see how Palestine has galvanized the world. It is the only cause, the only struggle, the only issue that is capable today of uniting, mobilizing every freedom-loving, justice-seeking, conscientious person on the planet. There is no other cause that can bring about millions of people in every capital of the world calling for the freedom of Palestine, calling for having the spirit that we need to get rid of this evil called Zionism and Zionist structures and apartheid in Palestine. That makes this struggle a global struggle. So we're entering now the phase of a global struggle where the main task, where is the main objective, is to defeat these Zionist ideas of having supremacy in this part of the world. That means we have to engage them on every field, politically, diplomatically, economically, commercially, industrially, technology, academically, culturally, in the legal circuits, in courts, in the media, socially, in the arts, in the entertainment. Every aspect that you can think of, they need to be engaged, and you need to be you need to engage them in terms of defeating them, weakening them, and undermining their influence, because that's the only way we can establish real justice. The alternative is that they're going to build this structures that you are seeing today in Palestine, and they want to even broaden this to the point where every single nation in this part of the world, in the greater Middle East, in the Arab and Muslim world, will be under their control, and they cannot advance scientifically because they will perceive that as a threat. They cannot advance economically because they will perceive that as a threat. They cannot advance civilizationally because they perceive that as a threat. They cannot unite politically because they perceive that as a threat. They cannot come together and establish a civilization because they perceive that as a threat. looking back at the so-called Arab Spring movements, they were fighting them tooth and nail to make sure that there will not be any real independent, democratic, free nation on this part, because they perceive that as a threat. The problem is that this part of the world cannot advance in any way, shape, or form without dealing with this challenge. It's like a cancer that is eating the body, and unless you end that cancer through stopping these supremacist, racist, expansionist, aggressive structures and policies, you cannot advance. So what we learned in the past year is that if this was a theoretical, this was just a theoretical presentation, now we see it in action. We saw how they dealt with everybody. They had no compunction whatsoever to kill as many people, regardless of anything, civilians, others, children, animals, women, destroying buildings, churches, mosques, hospitals, clinics, markets, deny people electricity, deny them food. Everything was open to them. There was actually no restraints, no red lines. That's how dangerous this thing is, and it has to be stopped. And it cannot be stopped unless everybody gets involved and everybody identifies where they can best serve in order to end this threat called Zionist regime.
Professor Sami, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope we can speak with each other again soon.
Thank you very much.